Okay, hey guys, this is Reverend Sean with the Center Path. And, I want to talk a little bit, and I've been kind of aiming things at how Western Buddhism has really done a disservice to traditional Buddhism because they're trying to make a square peg, if you will, fit into any hole. And I'll let you know kind of what that means as we discuss it. But we're talking about a new book, not a new book actually. It's called The First Free Women, Poems of Early Buddhist Nuns, written by Maddie Weingast. Well, here we go. I did actually get the book, so hopefully you can read this. The First Free Women, Poems of the Early Buddhist Nuns. And in the next parts, I'm going to explain a little bit about the article that's in lithub.com and how these were basically more massaged, I think, than anything to make them seem more fluffy or more palatable to poetry readers, which is fine, I think. But it's very interesting that this is the kind of thing that's happening in Buddhism is we're having this watering down, this virtual bleaching out of the actual information. And the other sad part about this is how many, if we look in here, how many people gave accolades to this. I mean, oh, gee whiz. This is portrayed as a translation of early Buddhist nuns. Specifically, the Buddha's stepmother was ordained by him as the first Buddhist nun and started the first group of Buddhist nuns in existence. Now, women were not allowed to do any religious rites at the time in Brahmanism and the Vedas and those kind of things. It was strictly for men. And when she came forward and basically talked to him and explained to him, and he explained to her, and they started discussing, they came up with, yeah, they have exactly the amount of wherewithal and wits and whatever you need to become a Buddhist nun, a monastic, an ascetic in the Buddhist practices. And they have just as much brains and all this kind of stuff, things that they said that you didn't in maybe the Brahmanic or other things. Now, there is a difference in nuns and monks in their stature in the either Mahayana or Theravada systems, depending on where they are. Now, there's still some backlash against that because that's just a patriarchal kind of idea. That's just a common thing here in this world. Many places are the same that don't accept the idea of a nun. Now, there's many nuns in like Tibet, and you're starting to see them in Sri Lanka a little bit. You're starting to see them a little bit in Thailand, definitely in China and Taiwan. And I don't think I've seen many in the Zen tradition, but in the West, you see the Zen tradition bring forward women because, just as good as anybody else. One of the things is the Vinaya, the rules that they follow is different, but the reasons those are different many times have to do with things like menstruation and some other health issues too. So there's some of those added in for that, and some of it's added because, there's just the culture. Our culture as humans, not as a culture as like the Eastern culture versus Western culture, because basically when you boil it down, it's all the same thing. Okay, so here's the title of the article. It's called How a Poetry Collection of Masquerading as Buddhist Scripture Nearly Duped the Literary World. Nearly. There's a couple things that happened in here which happen way more than you think. People get excited. There's a euphoria about something new that comes out, especially when it has to do with the cultural issues that we're dealing with today. For example, feminism and even the LGBTQ, anyway, the gay, lesbian, and trans and gender issues tend to weave their way into this stuff where they never had actually a place. And if it was mentioned, it's worth a discussion, but it's not worth twisting it around and presenting it as something that it's not. Now, many times here in the West, people try to, like I said, make a Buddhism which is a very specific shape. It has a very specific set of rules and a very specific way of dealing with things that tends to be twisted and massaged and molded to fit whatever's happening with the people at the time. Now, you can argue that this happened in the cultures that they approached. However, the basic teachings were always the same. The Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path, the Five Fetters, and these kind of things. Now, there's some increase in the definitions of those because it was failing perhaps in the language that it first showed up from, or they needed clarification. Now, one of the things that happens in the West here is that people are using translations of translations of translations and interpretations, and this is where we have a big problem. So this one here, the lioness roars of the ancient nuns have been muffled by sweet new agey purring. This is by Anne Tran. From the, let's see, the literary hub. It's called lithub.com. And this goes into the discussion of this book that was written of poems that were said to be from the Buddhist nuns of the original teachings. However, they were made up at the time and are missing a lot of topics that were very commonly talked about, like karma and some of the more esoteric things that were developing in Buddhism at the time. So this fellow, who turns out was written by a man, which is even more hilarious. So this is like hitting so many areas. And we see this so many times in Buddhism that people are portraying themselves as something that they're not. And they're portraying themselves as a real authority without ever doing any of the practice or any of the research. Now, it's hard enough to do the practice in a group that's a different culture group like that I was involved in. It's very hard because there was a lot of intertranslation stuff that I had to get through and had to, like, how can I make this work for me? I mean, I grew up basically Catholic, and that was not easy to translate some of those things into the things that I felt was true or I felt was normal or whatever have you. But it changed over time because I was so involved with the Buddhist teachings and the Buddhist practice that it became kind of like actually it overlapped all of the other stuff that I had learned. So this in here, if we're looking up they're called the Therigatha. So the Tathagata, and this is the Therigatha, which is the women that were part of the the original Sangha. Now, at first, they didn't want to have women, of course. That's what the Buddha said. He just said that they should do their own thing. I'm going to do my thing. Remember, he didn't want anybody in with him anyway in the beginning. Later on, he let some friends, and he met his first 5 ascetics, and there were 6 holy ones in the world, and all that jazz. And then his cousins and brothers and other people that came to him and said, I want to learn from you. Well, women started showing up, and one of the main ones was his stepmother. Okay, so she's the one who raised him. Remember, his mother died, and his stepmother raised him as her own, and really didn't even let him know until later on in life that he was actually didn't have his own mom. Okay, because she had died right after childbirth. So this guy, an American white man. This is funny how this becomes an issue too. Here we have a white person, a white man, portraying himself in writing as a Buddhist nun. And he made up these the verses of the elder nuns, the Therigatha, book of scripture written by the first awakened women. That's what it says. But once you read it, he made them all up. He did them because they felt right. He would read some of the old writings in perhaps different voices, it kind of explains in here, and in different ways, and see what felt good. And that's where we mess up with Buddhism, because people think that there's no judgment, that there's no structure, that it's kind of like a spiritual, fluid, foggy thing that's really wonderful and esoteric. It's not. It's very, very strict. It's not as malleable and amorphous as people get into. Try spending time at a temple anywhere in the world and try to do your own thing and see what happens. I mean, there's a good reason to have religious procedures and religious rites and etiquette and things like that to keep from this, to avoid the schism, it's called in Buddhism. We're trying to avoid schisms. Now, originally the Buddha only had those first 5 rules, right? And he kept having to add more and add more and add more as different things came up. Now, they started saying like, well, I got to start collecting money. Well, you're not allowed to hold money, or you can't eat after this time or before after that time, because what is happening is these guys, which is happening in Thailand today, some of these monks are getting to be overweight and starting to develop diabetes because of their food. Now they're eating too much and they're eating poor quality foods, so they need to change some of that and increase their activity level. Same thing happened when the Bodhidharma came to China. He saw that the monks that were already there were becoming lazy and they weren't practicing and they were just sitting around and meditating, and in their meditations they became flabby. So he said, we got to actually get out and move too. This is one of the things that started the whole Shaolin movement and the Shaolin monks, other than defending themselves too, but also to get them exercise, because the body is the carrier of everything and it's part of the five aggregates, right? But the body is not the self and the feelings are not the self and all that jazz. So as we get in here, it's not a translation. It's a work of original poetry by the author. So and what's even more funny is other Buddhist icons today, I suppose, either wrote accolades about this book and never read it, or actually endorsed this book. And so one of the things that happens is there's kind of a money grab going on for authors that are able to write books about whatever the hell they want and put it into written form, and it has nothing to do, very little to do with Buddhism. One of the things that's happened is we've had the peeling apart of meditation from mindfulness finally. And mindfulness was just Buddhism light, is what it really was. So people were taking Buddhist trainings and they were shaving out all of anything that seemed Buddhist at all, or ethnic or cultural, and tried to make it this secular thing. That's the other problem with secularism too, is people don't believe in the ability of themselves to really understand or to do things with religious ceremonies, for example. Many secular Buddhists avoid those at all costs. However, there's a huge importance for those, and there's a real use of religious ceremony and procedure and protocol that will help you along the path to understanding. This stuff's been around for a long time, and it has developed in this way. And if you want to really understand, for example, Tibetan Buddhism, you'd better learn how to do the proper Tibetan Buddhist prostrations, which are totally different from Thai or from Chinese or from whatever. The prostrations are completely different, and you wouldn't recognize them. If you go to Sri Lanka and you see how people bow versus or give homage to a monk or to the Buddha, the statue, they give homage or show respect. It's different. It's different in all those areas. We have to understand that. And it's not the same, of course, but you can't make it up. You can't walk in and decide that all of a sudden one day it's rub your belly and pat your head is now your way of showing respect. That's just not how this will work. Maybe in years and years and years of doing that, you start up your own little cult and you go from there. We see a lot of that stuff going on too in these days. But Mahapajapati is the first one. That's the Buddha's stepmother, and she became one of the first nun. And then she started up the first group of nuns to learn and to work with this. Now they had to come up with different rules, of course. This guy, what mother doesn't see a Buddha in her child? Now Bhante Sujato is an Australian monk. He translates texts he's in Australia, and he translates from the Pali texts. He puts this idea in her mouth that she's a mother first and would never get past that, really. So she's no longer a free one bound by the limitations of a man's understanding. That's a brilliant statement because it's true. Now, you want to be a mother or do you want to be a Buddha? Now, you could be both, of course, but you don't want to say, well, it's because you could be a mom that you probably shouldn't do this. It's because you could be a mom that really does set them down, and that's not correct. The author doesn't even know any of the Pali language words, but it's funny how other people oh, this is funny. I had no idea what I was doing. I was just kind of allowed me to just make it up as I went along. That's what he said in an interview. He admits to writing it from his own, like as if he channeled the information, which it doesn't happen, by the way. That's not Buddhist. You don't channel stuff from others. That's way too esoteric. Maybe in some forms of Tibetan Buddhism, but it's doubtful, and it's probably not what most people will do. You'll hear it sometimes, but you're not going to see it elsewhere. And it's sad that showed up this way. It really does, now put what's called a jaundiced eye towards a lot more writings that people have done, because now it's a diffusion of things as we go down. Now, if you look at people telling stories to each other anyway, okay, unless it's rhythmic, like the Vedas or even the Pali texts and the original canon, where it was spoken word, that has a rhythm to it, okay, and you don't miss the rhythm, and then that's how you know you messed up. And you would repeat it, and it would be repeated in small sections. So for example, the body is not the self. If the body were the self, one could say this body would not be subject to suffering. Is because the body is subject to suffering, that blah 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 blah. And then you would say the mental formations are not the self. Mental formations are not the self because, and it would say the same exact thing. So it's a repetitive process again and again. Now, if I just tell someone one story and they tell it to the next person, eventually used to be called telephone, where you tell a story to 20 people and they come back completely different at the end. That's why they started writing things down, because so many of the older guys were starting to die off. Oh, this is a hilariously terrible, or terribly hilarious, I'm not sure. Now this is through Shambhala, and they're the same kind of thing. I think they get a little punch drunk on the making money and selling books, and not really looking at the quality of what's coming out of them. And it's happened before. And there are some books out there that just probably should be not attributed to not attributed to Buddhism. There's some other way possibly. I mean, even Nico Odysseus of the Shambhala publication says, although it was certainly not our intention to mislead readers regarding the nature of this poetic re-imaging of the Therigatha, we see that many were, in fact, unclear about its point. We have acknowledged this or misjudgment, and we now present the author's work in a different light, basically. So they're not changing it. They're not going to change the cover. They're not going to change the description in there. But they are going to, at least maybe in the description of the book, say, hey, this is original poems from the original author, who's a white man. But anyway, tell me what you think about that. Don't forget to subscribe, hit the like button so you can see more of this. I'm going to do many more on this kind of stuff. I have a lot more coming up, because there's a lot of weird things that needs to be teased off. At least we got to look at it, and at least we have to discuss what it means to get this information across, and how we have to have some kind of quality assurance control. This is a thing that happens in Buddhism as well. We don't have quality assurances on monks themselves. Now in China, they have an entire division of the government which is like verifying these monks and verifying the temples, and many of them were built without permits and stuff like that. That's a huge controversy that's going on in the Tibetan Autonomous Region and in China, where they're destroying things, most of which were just recently built. Some of the older ones too, apparently, but you got to look at each case as it is. I don't like the idea that they're destroying artistic and cultural and religious icons at all. I think they're all beautiful, and they should be able to stand on their own. But some of them are built for as a what's it called, as a tourist destination, and they're using Buddhism to bring tourism to those areas. So again, we get into some murky stuff, and it's a commercialization of McBuddhism, and we got to watch out for those kind of things. I think it was Ron Purser who coined the term McMindfulness, because that's what it really is. It's just commercialization of a religious and spiritual activity is really kind of the sad part. Now, you may get into it that way, which is fine. Don't forget to subscribe, guys. If you get into it, that's fine from that way, and then as you start digging deeper, you're going to find other stuff that you're going to get rid of, that tarnish and that polish, and you'll see the real stonework of the Buddhist culture, basically the Buddhist philosophy, the Buddhist spirituality, and the Buddhist religion. This is Reverend Sean over at the Center Path. You guys take care of yourselves. Be good, be kind, be happy, and take care of yourselves, and may you be at peace.